There is a level of focus that makes others feel scared. You may have seen that person, not the one who works the most, not the one who talks the most in meetings, but somehow they always complete the most important task before everyone else. When an email arrives, they don't react. When Slack flashes, they don't flinch. When meetings overlap on the calendar, they still disappear for a few hours and return with the result completed. Not progress, not promises. Real results. While others are busy explaining, procrastinating, negotiating with time, this person just quietly moves forward. They don't do more than you. They don't stay up later than you, but they always stay ahead. And you know what people say about them? He's not normal. Not normal because they don't panic. Not normal because they aren't pulled away by notifications, messages, or endless meetings. Not normal because they can sit still with one single task until it's finished. So let me ask you a question, and don't answer hastily. Why do some people work less than you, but always produce more results? Why the busier you get, the further behind you fall while they don't? The answer isn't in motivation. It isn't in discipline, and it certainly isn't in trying harder. There is a focus system rooted in Japan, created not to help you do more things, but to eliminate everything that fragments your attention. But listen carefully to this. That system isn't for everyone. It isn't comfortable. It isn't flexible, and it requires the death of the old you. The one who's always distracted, always busy, always promising that tomorrow will be different. If you just want a few productivity tips, stop here. Chapter 1. The Awakening. The story I'm about to tell you happened to a man named Daniel Harris. Daniel didn't wake up to an alarm clock. He woke up to notifications. His phone buzzed before his eyes were fully open. Emails from the European team. Slack messages from the engineering team. His calendar for the day was already packed before he even got out of bed. He reached for the phone, replied quickly to a few, and told himself that if he just handled things a little early, today would be different. But it never was. Daniel's entire day passed in back-to-back meetings, one spawning another, each generating more emails, messages, and things that needed immediate response. He was always busy, always online, always available, and that was exactly what was killing him. By evening, when his mind was drained of energy, Daniel would open his to-do list again and see a terrifyingly familiar sight. The most important task still sitting there untouched. It was like that every week. Monday started with a clear plan, even full of determination. Today he would focus. Today he would do the right things. By noon, that focus began to shatter into small pieces. An urgent message, an unexpected call, a meeting just 15 minutes that dragged on for an hour. By afternoon, Daniel was no longer working on his plan. He was just firefighting, putting out whatever was loudest, handling whatever was screaming the most. By evening, he leaned back in his chair, exhausted, and made the same promise as every week: tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow I'll have better control. Tomorrow I'll focus more. Daniel wasn't ignorant. When he realized there was a problem, he did exactly what a smart person in the modern world would do. He downloaded productivity apps. He tried every kind of task management system. He read books about deep work. He blocked his calendar down to the minute with time blocking. He bought tools that promised to reclaim focus. But the more he tried to optimize, the more fragmented his day became. The more tools he added, the more mentally exhausted he felt. The problem wasn't that Daniel didn't know what he should do. The problem was that he never had an unbroken block of time to actually do it. The rock bottom moment came on a very ordinary evening. Daniel looked back at his work week and realized a chilling truth. He had worked non-stop, but the only thing that had progressed was his level of burnout. No breakthroughs, no clear results, just perpetual busyness. And for the first time, he stopped blaming himself. A question emerged, slowly but terrifyingly. If I'm not lazy, not lacking discipline, and never stop trying, why am I still standing still? If the problem isn't willpower, then where is it? That very question led Daniel to something he had never sought before. Not a new app, not an optimization technique, but an ancient system, cold and ruthless toward distraction, from a place where people don't try to do more, but simply eliminate until there's nothing left to negotiate. And that's when the real story began. Chapter 2. The Japanese Secret of Focus. Daniel didn't seek it out of curiosity. He sought it because he had reached a point of no return. The question from the previous evening still clung to his mind like a steady knock. If it's not laziness, not lack of discipline, then what is really destroying my focus? For the first time in years, Daniel didn't open a productivity app, didn't search for self-help books, didn't watch videos on working more effectively. What he encountered came from a place completely foreign to the tech world he lived in. On a short business trip, he attended a small workshop led by a Japanese businessman. No stage, no background music, no flashy slides. The man stood in front of the quiet room, looked everyone straight in the eye, and said something that made Daniel uncomfortable. From the very first second, the Japanese don't optimize focus. They eliminate everything that isn't focus. Not doing it faster, not doing it smarter, not forcing the brain to do more. They just cut away. That statement went against everything Daniel had ever believed. In his world, focus was something trained through discipline, supported by tools, optimized by methods. But here focus was treated as a natural state that only emerges when nothing else interferes. The businessman talked about Japanese monasteries, where for hundreds of years there has been only one fixed time slot each day for practice. No one asks whether they'll do it today. No one waits for inspiration. No one negotiates with fatigue. That question simply doesn't exist. When the time comes, the bell rings, and the body stands up. Daniel listened and immediately resisted. Too rigid, too extreme, too unrealistic for modern life. But at the same time, something in him was struck. He realized that for years, what had exhausted him wasn't the work itself, but the constant need to decide what to focus on. Every email was a choice. Every message was a fork in the road. Every meeting was a legitimized interruption. His brain wasn't tired from working. It was tired from endless negotiation. The businessman called this structure the Japanese secret of focus, a system not based on willpower but on rules. It doesn't require you to be stronger, it just removes any space for weakness. The core of the system is a single principle. Focus only becomes sustainable when it sustains itself, when you no longer have to ask each day whether you'll focus or not. He explained that the human brain categorizes all commitments into two types. Reversible commitments, where there's always an escape for negotiation. Tired today, make it up tomorrow. Busy today, do it tomorrow. And irreversible commitments, where there's no room for dialogue. It's not a promise, it's reality. All the productivity systems Daniel had used failed because they placed focus in the realm of choice. He chose to focus. He chose to prioritize. He chose deep work, and every choice depleted more mental energy. On the flight home, Daniel didn't open his laptop. He didn't check email. He opened a blank page and wrote a single declaration. One time slot each day that no one was allowed to invade. One type of work only in that slot, and a clear output standard to end it. No flexibility, no negotiation. He made it public to his colleagues. He told his boss. The reactions came immediately. You're overdoing it. No need to be this extreme. This won't last. Daniel didn't argue. He didn't try to convince anyone, because for the first time he realized he didn't need consensus. What he was doing wasn't experimenting with a new tip. He was changing the position of attention in his life, and in that moment, as he underlined the last line on the page, Daniel understood something he had never dared think before. My attention is no longer a choice. It is law. Chapter 3. The Inner War. Daniel thought everything would get easier once he made the public declaration and set the fixed focus block, but reality was far more brutal. The system was in place. The rules were written, but every morning when the focus block began, his brain still rebelled fiercely. Not with obvious laziness, but with very reasonable excuses. Just check email for 1 minute. Just reply to this message, and be done. Just glance at the calendar quickly for peace of mind. Daniel realized an uncomfortable truth. Even when he no longer had to decide whether to focus, his brain was still trying to sabotage the system from the inside. That's when he discovered the next principle of the Japanese-style focus system, one the businessman had mentioned, but he hadn't fully grasped. The focus block is non-negotiable. Not a flexible time that can be shifted. Not a promise of if I have time I'll do it. But a fixed point in the day, like the sun rising or a church bell ringing. Daniel locked that block on his calendar. No meetings, no notifications, no exceptions. The question when will I focus no longer existed. It had been erased from his mind, and in the first few days this created a strangely terrifying feeling. When time became a constant, his brain had no room left to negotiate about timing. It was forced to show up on time whether it wanted to or not. But right then, a new front opened. Once the when question was eliminated, Daniel's brain immediately shifted to a more subtle one. What? In that focus block, he started wavering. Today, should I work on the strategy document or finish the lingering tasks? Should I tackle the big problem or clear the small tasks to feel lighter? Should I do the hardest thing or the easiest to build momentum? The focus block, created to free him from fragmentation, now became a battlefield of choices. Daniel sat there in front of his screen, undisturbed by the outside world, but torn apart from within. He realized he was repeating the same old problem, just in a more sophisticated form. Before, his attention was pulled away by emails and meetings. Now it was eroded by having to decide what to focus on. Every choice carried a hidden fear. Choosing wrong would waste the most precious block of the day, and that fear made him hesitate. The system was running, but it wasn't smooth yet. Daniel began observing himself with a new coldness. He realized the brain doesn't resist focus. It resists being stripped of choice. When it couldn't negotiate time, it shifted to negotiating content. And if he didn't lock this door too, the whole system would collapse. In the following days, the war intensified. There were mornings he sat in the focus block and accomplished nothing significant, not because of interruptions, but because he was stuck in his own head. He felt frustrated, even doubtful. Maybe those Japanese ways only work in monasteries, not in this volatile tech world. But then Daniel remembered the statement that had made him uncomfortable from the start. The Japanese don't optimize, they eliminate. If the system wasn't working yet, it wasn't because it was missing something, but because too much was still allowed to exist. And at that point he understood that this war wasn't between him and the work, but between him and his need for choice. The freedom he had always believed was necessary for creativity was actually destroying his focus bit by bit. The time block was locked, but the path inside that block still had too many forks. The system wasn't complete yet, and Daniel knew it. At the end of one particularly wrenching morning, he wrote a short line in his notebook, not as a complaint, but as an accurate diagnosis of his real problem. I've locked the time, but choice is still destroying me. Chapter 4. Shameless Focus. The inner war had barely subsided when real life began its counterattack. Daniel was no longer in an ideal environment where everything could be controlled by calendars and rules. Business trips appeared unexpectedly. Deadlines piled up without warning. One delayed project dragged 3 others behind it. The phone buzzed more. The meeting schedule was torn apart. The situations that had once been perfect excuses for him to break every previous system returned one by one, as if testing whether what he had just built could truly stand firm. In the past, this was exactly where Daniel collapsed. A trip became an exception. A stressful week became an excuse. A tired day became a legitimate reason to stop and promise to return later. But this time, something was different. In his mind echoed the principle the Japanese called coldly, not perfect, but unbroken. No one demanded ideal conditions. No one required the focus session to be beautiful, deep, or complete. The only thing not allowed was a gap. Daniel took his focus block onto the plane. No longer in a quiet office, he opened his laptop amid the engine noise. No longer at his familiar desk, he sat in a hotel corner and did exactly the one predetermined task. Some days his focus time was shortened. Some days the output didn't meet the highest standard. But the chain was never broken. When deadlines tightened, Daniel didn't abandon the focus block to chase panic. He used that very block to handle the most important thing, then let the rest fend for itself. When personal crises arose, he didn't pretend to be strong, but he also didn't allow himself to turn emotions into excuses. He did less, slower, but still showed up on time. No one around him understood what was happening. Colleagues saw him working at the airport and shook their heads. Friends heard him decline a few usual invitations and thought he was torturing himself. Some said outright, "Working like this isn't healthy." Daniel didn't argue. He didn't explain. Because this was no longer about convincing others. He began seeing results before he could name them. Tasks that used to drag on for weeks were now completed in days. Major decisions were made in short but sharp focus sessions. The strangest thing was that he no longer felt the familiar exhaustion. Before, every disruption eroded him because it broke the rhythm. Now disruptions only changed the form, not the flow. Daniel realized the core difference between resting and quitting. Resting is part of the flow. Quitting is a gap. And it was those gaps that devoured all progress. The Japanese-style focus system didn't require him to win every day. It only required him not to turn bad days into reasons to revert to the old self. When a day only allowed 15 minutes of focus, he used those 15 minutes. When a day allowed deeper work, he went deeper. The chain was never broken. Attention was never abandoned. And over time, something terrifying began to happen. Focus no longer depended on circumstances. It was no longer a fragile thing needing protection by ideal conditions. It became adaptive, seeping through every crack of busy life. Daniel looked back at the most chaotic weeks and realized they were the ones with the highest output. Not because he did more, but because he didn't lose the chain. While others used disruptions to justify stopping, he used disruptions to prove his system didn't need favorable conditions to operate. And on one late evening, after a long day that was anything but easy yet complete with an unbroken focus chain, Daniel wrote down a short sentence, not as a slogan but as the new boundary of his life. Ordinary people protect comfort. I protect attention. Chapter 5. The Transformation. Daniel didn't notice the exact moment everything changed, because it didn't arrive with a bang or a clear victory. There was no day he woke up and declared that from today he was a different person. What happened was quieter, more terrifying. He stopped seeking focus, no longer trying to create conditions, no longer waiting for the right state. Focus appeared before he even thought about it. The time slot arrived and his body automatically sat down. No hesitation, no negotiation, no need for motivation. Focus was no longer something he had to shield from the outside world. It became the default state, like breathing or a heartbeat. Daniel began noticing this through cold numbers. Tasks that once took all day were now completed in 2 or 3 hours of sharp focus. Not because he worked faster, but because no energy leaked to distraction, choices, or hesitation. One morning was enough to handle what previously dragged into the evening. One focus block was enough to advance a project in ways dozens of prior meetings never could. Strangely, he didn't feel like he was working harder. On the contrary, he finished work days earlier, with a lighter mind, yet clearer results than ever. And then the reactions from those around him began to shift. Colleagues noticed Daniel was no longer swept into the familiar busyness vortex. He no longer responded instantly to every message. He disappeared for a few hours each day, then returned with decisions made, problems solved, direction set. Some were curious, some were annoyed, some half-jokingly said his way of working looked scary. Scary because he didn't panic like them. Scary because he didn't need to talk a lot to prove he was busy. Scary because his calm exposed a truth they didn't want to face. Most of their busyness was self-created. Daniel didn't explain. He didn't persuade, because by now, he understood he was no longer playing the same game. What had happened wasn't a new habit, but an identity change. Looking back, the system revealed itself clearly, ruthlessly simple. The public declaration, where attention was no longer a personal decision, but an irrevocable commitment. The fixed time slot, where the question when was erased from the brain. A single path in each focus block, where choices were eliminated so action could occur. No gaps, where bad days were never allowed to become voids. And pre-decided responses, so no disruption forced him to think in chaos. The Japanese-style focus system didn't make Daniel perfect. It made him unbreakable. He was no longer someone trying to focus amid a distracting world. He became someone whose attention operated as a closed, self-sustaining system, needing no oversight. What chilled Daniel most when looking back wasn't the increased productivity, but the fact he could no longer return to the old self. The thought of working in fragmented states, pulled by notifications and choices, now felt physically uncomfortable, like trying to breathe in an oxygen-deprived room. And that's when he understood what the Japanese businessman never said outright, but what lay behind every principle. This system isn't meant to help you work better. It forces you to become a different person, a person many around you won't understand, and some will fear, not because you're more aggressive, but because your presence shatters their familiar excuses. Daniel wrote the final line in his notebook, not as advice but as an irreversible boundary. You cannot have this level of focus and remain the same person. Then he paused, looked up, and let the question hang, addressed to no one but the person reading these words. Are you ready? If this story has made you see focus and the way you're living each day differently, subscribe to follow so you don't miss the next content for those ready to become not normal. Thank you for staying until here. See you in the next part.